They used the same leap day rule from to Tenochtitlan, an algorithm that recurs in temple books, commandery ledgers, and 17th-century tractates.
Welcome to Stargate Codex. I am Dr. Elias Thorne. In this episode, we examine an anomaly that forces us to rethink how timing itself was conserved as a political technology.
Numbers matter. How close are we talking? Babylonian scholars in the Enuma Anu Enlil tradition worked with corrections that approximate the solar year to roughly 365.2422 days for practical eclipse and agricultural planning. Egyptian clerical practice ran a civil count of 365.0 days, producing a drift of about 1 day every 1,460 years. Mesoamerican ritual systems use a 365-day solar count paired with a 260-day ritual cycle to form a 52-year concordance. Those figures are precise anchors, not rhetorical flourishes. This convergence, similar numerical strategies for reconciling lunar months, solar years, and ritual cycles, is the anomaly we begin with. It raises two working possibilities: independent convergence driven by observation, or conserved transmission of calendrical algorithms across networks of custodians. The evidence points us toward a cautious, document-driven conclusion. Let us inspect the nodes. Enuma Anu Enlil tablets contain explicit sequences for eclipse intervals and stepwise lunar corrections. Specific lines in surviving copies give correction ratios used by Babylonian temple astronomers to reconcile lunar months with a solar anchor for the purpose of almanacs and ritual timing. In Egypt, Old Kingdom administrative ostraca and royal stone entries, including registers preserved on the Turin and Palermo fragments, show clerical bookkeeping that indexes harvests and corvée work to a 365-day civil year, with periodic notations when priestly bureaus corrected for drift tied to the heliacal return of Sirius. And in Mesoamerica, the Dresden Codex preserves Venus and eclipse-related tables, whose interleaved counts impose a practical regimen for ritual events against a solar 365-day framework and the 260-day ritual cycle. The result is a working calendrical technology that schedules ceremonies and civic obligations with remarkable predictability.
Think of it this way: a governing body that can declare the day and fix the date for tribute, harvest labor, or a public rite consolidates administrative advantage. Calendrical pronouncements are administrative acts with material consequences.
Turning to language and microtexts, Sumerian and Akkadian calendrical verbs indicate insertion and proclamation. Egyptian hieratic associates the civil day count with temple liturgy. Mayan glyphic verbs record the binding of cycles. The technical vocabulary is not metaphor. It instructs officials when to intercalate and when to observe. These are administrative directives, not folk observations.
Listen to a translated marginal note preserved in a municipal collection and cited in later tractates. Insert the intercalary month when the barley matures late. That short procedural sentence tells us two things. First, that agricultural observation determined corrective practice. Second, that corrective practice was recorded in a procedural, transmissible form. Now follow the documentary chain forward. Medieval Templar ledgers and cathedral capitelar rolls lock fiscal disbursement and labor obligations to paschal tables and movable feasts. The timing of tithes and corvée often references liturgical calendars preserved in monastic scriptoria. In the 17th century, we find Rosicrucian and learned tractates that explicitly reproduce earlier correction rules in Latinized algorithmic form, sometimes citing older exemplars. Pythagorean fragments circulated as authorities on cyclical harmonies and were invoked to justify temporal rites. The manuscripts create interlinked nodes, a temple table copied into a monastic codex, later excerpted in an esoteric tract, later referenced in a commandery register. Skye Alden's compilations make these linkages traceable. Her bibliography records where 17th-century manifestos cite older tables, where marginalia tie a monastic exemplar to a cathedral codex, and where metrological constants recur across transcriptions. These are archival linkages, footnote to footnote, marginal note to corrected line, a preserved number repeated across centuries.
But similarity alone is not proof. Methodologically, I require a conservative triad before asserting transmission. 1. Textual citation chains, explicit references, provenance notes, and manuscript lineages. 2. Metrological congruence, numerical constants and correction steps that match within reasonable copying error. 3. Physical instantiation, architecture or inscriptions that anchor the textual rule to a built environment or observable alignment. When at least two criteria cohere, the balance shifts toward probable transmission rather than coincidental convergence.
Consider an example cluster, a Babylonian correction sequence documented in a temple table, a monastic copy in a Mediterranean scriptorium that reproduces the numeric steps with near-identical rounding, and an ecclesiastical calendar stone set within a church aligned to the same solstitial sunrise anchor. Text, number, and stone. Two of those three criteria are met. That is a strong node for transmission. What pattern emerges across the corpus? First, calendrical protocols consistently regulate agricultural windows, tax and tribute schedules, liturgical legitimacy, and elite ceremonial timing. Second, custody of the calendar is institutional. Priesthoods, chapter houses, and brotherhoods exercised authority by pronouncing the date. Third, built alignments, temples, causeways, and inscriptions physically encode enderpoints that corroborate textual rules. The pattern repeats and reinforces itself.
This is where the geometry of power becomes useful. Treat the calendrical algorithm as temporal geometry, a formula producing resonance between sky, architecture, and human schedule. An intercalation rule is, in effect, a metrological device. An axis aligned to sunrise is a permanent temporal instrument. Together, they form a codex, a system of texts, numbers, and alignments that continues to function across institutional transitions.
Where does this leave us? The evidence supports treating calendrical systems as a conserved initiatory technology. Procedural texts, metrological rules, and architectural anchors transmitted and adapted by custodial institutions to regulate production and validate authority. Consult the episode notes for a compiled bibliography of primary texts, selected Enuma Anu Enlil passages, transcriptions from the Turin and Palermo fragments, cited folios of the Dresden Codex, transcribed Templar ledger entries, and the Rosicrucian tables documented in Alden's compilation, and a downloadable appendix comparing numerical constants and alignment coordinates.
That concludes our historical tracking of this specific anomaly within the Codex. The records demonstrate that behind the curtain of standard history lies a repeating systemic mechanism of knowledge transmission and governance preserved across generations. We have laid out the timeline, parsed the primary source texts, and exposed the architectural blueprint. The archive never lies. The text remains.